Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. We'll start off with the NFL draft that finished up over the weekend, obviously, and it was an interesting draft for local teams. The Chicago Bears got a pretty good receiver in Kevin White from West Virginia, and the Kansas City Chiefs, they didn't have too bad of a draft, and the St. Louis Rams, depending on who you talk to, they either had a great draft or they had a fairly mediocre draft. And as I mentioned in my prior video about the overhypeness, if that's even a word, I may have created a word, the overhyped nature of the NFL draft leading up to it. The St. Louis Rams, as I said, it's a perfect example. You have some people that say it was a great draft, some people say it wasn't. It's probably somewhere in the middle ground. The one thing that I will say from a personal aspect of the St. Louis Rams draft was it was a little bit interesting simply for the fact that they had some surprises, they filled some needs, but there are some question marks, and I will be the first one to acknowledge that. Their first round draft pick in Todd Gurley is one that he's supremely talented. He's second in just about every statistical category at the University of Georgia to Herschel Walker. That's a name that you want to be associated with, but he's got the injury bug, and not necessarily in terms of his entire career, but when you have a knee injury, it's kind of a toss of the dice. You could have recurring problems like Derrick Rose. You could be like Adrian Peterson where you come back and it almost seems like you're better for having the surgery. But given the Rams' recent history with knee problems with Sam Bradford and him turning out to be injury prone, the talent is there. You want it to be able to translate itself onto the field, but from a fan's aspect, there are some worries to whether he will stay on the field. As a fan, obviously I hope he has a great career and he spends the majority of it, if not all of it, in a St. Louis Rams uniform, but there are worries in that aspect. Looking at some of the other draft picks for the St. Louis Rams, they really filled a lot of needs. They needed some offensive line help, and this is what, well, I'll get to that in a second. We'll just list the draft picks right now. They got offensive lineman Rob Havenstein from the University of Wisconsin, Javon Brown from Louisville. He's another offensive lineman. Then the next pick was Sean Mannion, quarterback out of Oregon State. I'll admit, I really don't know anything about the kid. I've heard a few good things, but Oregon State wasn't great either. So, I mean, if he can develop something under Nick Foles, learn a few years, then maybe obviously get a chance. You never know. I mean, Kurt Warner wasn't... He went to Northern Iowa, and then he spent some time in the Arena League. So you can never tell where these kids are going to come and what they could do in the NFL. After that, another offensive lineman in Andrew Donal, Bud Sasser, wide receiver, then an offensive lineman in Cody Wickman, linebacker Bryce Hager, and then defensive end Martin Ifedi. The last two are a little bit head-scratching just because... especially defensive end is not a position to where the St. Louis Rams need any more help. So unless they're planning on moving Ifedi around, either having him bulk up and potentially play in the middle or slim down and potentially play in the linebacking core. The Rams' linebacking core wasn't all that bad either, so adding a little bit of depth is fine, but the Rams are at the point where they need to make sure that every single pick they make is potentially going to be playing on the NFL roster. You can't. They've had too many, not necessarily this regime, but just the organization as a whole has had way too many picks to where they projects, I guess you would say, and you can't necessarily afford to do that right now. The organization needs stability. They need talent on the field. They need to start winning because it's just a really weird situation going into this year. There's so many question marks with the organization. Where are they going to play in the future? Is there going to be funding for a local stadium? Is the owner going to care whether or not there's a local stadium or not because he believes more money is available in Los Angeles? So the St. Louis Rams, in terms of the on-field product, just need to be polished. They need to start getting things together and at least get to 500. It's been so long since they've even been that they really need to give this fan base, the ancillary fan base, something to cheer about. The hardcore fans are always going to be there, and but the outside, the kind of rounding out of the fan base needs to be given something to cheer about. The one thing that I wanted to touch on a minute ago, and it really does irritate me, is the media, and again, I've pointed this out in other videos, that they want to try to focus on the negative all the time because that sells newspapers. And perfect example, today's sports page, they're not necessarily ripping the St. Louis Rams draft, but they're sitting there saying, oh, well, it's full of question marks, and oh, they better hope that there's still free agent offensive linemen out there available because there's so many question marks in this draft. Well, going into the draft, nobody thought that the St. Louis Rams were going to draft a running back with the first pick, the team's first pick. So everybody was knowing that that the Rams were going to need offensive line help through the draft. Then all of a sudden the St. Louis Rams do just that. They pick up offensive line help, and lots of it. 3 or 4 picks spent on offensive linemen. And offensive linemen are such a crapshoot that you can't sit there and say, well, it's a bunch of question marks, because everybody is a question mark coming out of the draft. The St. Louis Rams are a perfect example. Again, not necessarily this regime, but the St. Louis Rams' time in the NFL draft since they've been in this city is littered with so many picks that were supposedly surefire picks that ended up spending a couple years in the league, and then all of a sudden they were either on a different team or on the street looking for work elsewhere. It's a situation where you just don't know what these teams are going to get when they draft these players. The St. Louis Rams, quite frankly, should have one of the best offensive lines in the league. But instead, because certain draft picks didn't pan out over the last 5 to 10 years, the St. Louis Rams are still looking for that cornerstone piece of the offensive line, let alone the whole offensive line. So just let them develop a little bit. Give them a little bit of time. There doesn't need to be this huge second guessing of every single pick before they even slip on the Rams jersey. I'm not saying that the newspapers and television media can't do their job. If they honestly believe that certain picks are questionable or not talented, not fitting into a certain scheme, then that's their job to sit there and put it out there. But to just sit there and say, well, just because these offensive linemen aren't the top picks that we had prognosticated, then all of a sudden, well, these are questionable picks. It's like, come on, let's get a little bit serious here. St. Louis Rams are going to be fine. I believe they've done a decent job. If they can pick up some talent through free agency, help out that offensive line, give it even more depth. We've seen in years past that the St. Louis Rams have terrible luck when it comes to offensive line health come the season. So the more depth they have, the better. But let these kids show a little bit in training camp before you really start to judge what kind of talent they're going to have. Again, I hope Todd Gurley stays healthy. He could be a definite upgrade in the running game. I feel bad for Zach Stacy on the surface of things because he was sitting there thinking that his job was safe, that he had done enough in seasons prior to really earn that starting position. But that's how the NFL works, I'm afraid. And I don't think he did himself any favors by immediately tweeting out "yikes" when the pick was made. And thus, after that, I would hope that it didn't play into that, but after that, Zach Stacy was traded to the Jets for more picks. Best of luck to him in the rest of his career. And hopefully the St. Louis Rams have their running back for the future, and hopefully they have a lot of players that are going to block very well for him. That'll wrap it up for today's View from the Midwest. Comment, rate, and subscribe if you're watching on Facebook. Share it around with your friends, and we'll keep this rolling. Until the next time, I will see you then.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much.